So, everyone, my name is Delmar Larsen. I am a professor of chemistry at the University of California, Davis. I am also the founder and executive director of the LibreTexts project, which is obviously the topic of what we're discussing right now. We have a portfolio of about 10 to 11 presentations during this week's discussion. This is the third one today, and it should probably, and it's the first one that I'm giving, and it's part of a sort of tying everything together in the beginning in order to show what it is that the LibreText, and more specifically the LibreVerse, which is our term for describing all the different technologies that we have together that individuals have in order to be able to master OER for their respective projects. If you're interested in looking at some of the other projects that or presentations during Open Ed Week, if you go to our blog at blog.libretext.org, relatively simple URL and remember, you'll find a listing of those presentations, and I encourage you in order to engage. Now, these things will also be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, and I'm not entirely sure how OE Global is going to be distributing that information out there. But anyways, okay, so let's begin. And I'll begin by celebrating our 14th birthday. In fact, it was 14 years ago, actually to last week, that we had our very first submission to the ChemWiki, which is the precursor to the LibreTexts project, in an instrumental analysis class that I was teaching over the winter. So we're very happy in order to be 14 years old, and we look forward to many more years after this. In development. Okay, so let's start with the mission statement of the LibreTexts project. So we're implementing a community-built platform for the construction, curation, adoption, and adaption of OER that's comprehensive and can be curated at multiple levels. And each of these 3 C's are particularly important, and each of these 4 terms here after platform are particularly important. So the concept is a community, and while no man is an island. I'm not entirely sure how to modify that for today's perspective. No person is an island, to abuse the quote. The key aspects behind OER is the ability in order to share content and distribute it so that people can effectively capitalize on other people's efforts. And the key aspect behind the LibreTexts project is in order to augment that as strongly as possible for both the faculty in my community, the students in my community, and also the greater world. It's an OER platform, which for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to say free or freely available or freely accessible. We can easily spend a whole half an hour plus in order to discuss and debate what OER really constitutes, but let's ignore that for now. It's comprehensive in that we follow a no get left behind policy and a no tech left behind policy. I mentioned that the LibreTexts project was born out of a precursor project called the ChemWiki, which was obviously focusing on chemistry. We've expanded beyond that to essentially cover every field horizontally, from social sciences, workforce, to the STEM fields, and then vertically in terms of even from K-12 all the way up to graduate level. So there's no aspect that we're particularly interested in, or at least not interested in addressing at one point or another in building the scope of our infrastructure. And lastly, it's curated, meaning that it's a dynamic living library. And I'll be touching upon that multiple times during this presentation, but the key aspect is that no book is ever static within the OER universe, at least within my view of the OER universe. So whenever you look at a book that's an OER, it's a snapshot in time. And that's how the LibreTexts project is designed, such that things are always evolving, always improving, always being able to be edited. And that is different from the static perspective of more traditional make a book, publish a book, put a book in the library, and then you go to it and it stays like that for an extended period of time. We want the ability in order to go in and update things for issues that are important for topical aspects. For example, if I were if I were an author for a political science textbook that was written 6 years ago, certainly in the last handful of years in the United States, the political science approaches have completely failed in many circumstances. If I were interested in a lot of other aspects, introducing diversity, equity, inclusiveness, and other aspects, we can go about implementing that because it's a dynamic library instead of a static library. The opposite of static would be something like, or the opposite of a living library would be a dead library, like a pile of PDFs, for example. And that's not a very effective way in order to curate. So what is the LibreTexts project? So the LibreTexts project has three principal outward-facing aspects associated with it. One is it is a construction platform for OER. One is it's a distribution platform for OER, and one is it's a learning platform. And this, while this is for authors and this is for instructors and authors alike, the learning platform, the learning aspect is more for the students who capitalize on the content in order to be able to move forward. The key aspect behind why we developed the system in this way is that we are instructors. Everyone on my team is in academia. Almost everyone on my team are teaching faculty, and we understand the limitations of a more, let's say, publishing only approach in our environment. So, and that right there reflects in this greater scope of the LibreVerse. That's more than just a textbook. It's a much greater infrastructure in order to be able to address what we feel is necessary as instructors. I wear multiple hats. Sometimes I wear a hat as an OER author, pursuing building books for my own classroom, as a LibreTexts founder and executive director. I'm a construction I'm an ed tech person, and also from a OER project developer. I'm a co-chair of the OER program at UC Davis and such. So this is the LibreVerse in its general overview. The LibreVerse consists of multiple servers, multiple instances or applications designed in order to address certain issues, to give a portfolio that's able to address the broader scope of what I believe education, and more specifically the textbook, constitutes. The key aspect behind this thing is that the nature of the textbook is evolving. Anyone who's actually looked at it can see that as technology advances, it starts to creep into our textbook and start to introduce new and very powerful and actually very exciting aspects in terms of moving it forward from a traditional paper-based perspective. But that intrinsically is empowered by ed tech, or educational technologies, and that is a core aspect behind what we're talking about here. So I want to be able to go through some of these aspects associated with the LibreVerse here, but not every aspect, because I just don't have enough time in order to be able to do that. So the key aspect that I want to talk about to begin with is the libraries. So the central hub of the overall LibreVerse is 14 pseudo-independently operating wiki instances. And they were wiki technologies because they were designed in order to be able to handle at scale construction efforts, like I was mentioning before our presentation, because we knew we wanted to have a lot of faculty that contributed to it, that curated to it, and a lot of potentially a lot of students to do that and learn from that. So to the 14 years since we had our first save in the ChemWiki, we have delivered somewhere in the order of 800 million pages of content. We expect to reach 1 billion by our 15th birthday next year. We've confirmed over 6 millennia of student reading. These numbers here are not entirely up to date. We have about 500,000 pages of OER content. Much of it is harvested, which is our term, taking content into our repository, capitalizing on the definitions of OER. We have over 120,000 pages or assessments that are part of our homework system. We have somewhere in the order of 1,000 books that are centrally curated, and another 1,000 books that are customized for individual faculty at individual campuses for their needs. And then I don't know how many hubs we have currently right now, but I think it's somewhere in the order of about 500, 600 hubs, each campus being able to host their content on their hubs themselves. So let's start again with the libraries. So first I should comment about what the libraries are, or why the libraries existed. So OER content can be found in a variety of different places. You can find links to content in the open textbook library. It's a repository, not a repository. OER Commons is largely a repository, although they do have some authoring capabilities. OpenStax has content, Merlot has content and repository, OpenSunny, Galileo, Open Oregon, NOVA, BC Campus, eCampus Ontario, Alberta, Hawaii, Saylor, California State University, Oregon, and a wide selection of other resources across the net. What this means is that the content, OER content in the world is heavily fragmented, distributed on a variety of different places. In some cases, you need to go to an oracle, oftentimes a librarian, in order to go to and say, please find me OER content that is out there. And we feel that this is a fundamental flaw and a big issue in terms of moving OER forward for several reasons. One, it's difficult in order to find content, and that's one of the bigger issues that was identified multiple years ago. And now that there's more investment in OER, especially in the last 5 years or so, both at the federal and the state level, it's gotten even worse. The second one is curation. Imagine that you have 20 different copies of the same book distributed in various places. If one campus improves chapter 1, another campus improves chapter 2, another campus improves chapter 3. How do you bring that all together? If you don't have an infrastructure for versioning in order to bring things together, which we don't have a way in order to be able to make it so that when campus 5 comes in, they can benefit from what campus 1, 2, and 3 have actually done. This is us moving forward as a community in order to be able to, and we're tripping on ourselves by tying our shoelaces together, by not actually organizing these things in a constructive manner. Now, like I said, there are several ways that we can approach this issue. One way in order to approach it is to have some sort of versioning control across multiple platforms. That doesn't exist right now. So the alternative, which is what we did, is to take OER content, because it has the O and the OER, means that we could harvest it, which is our term of bringing it into our platform and making it all standardized for everyone to be able to access. And that right there is, again, the power of OER. And by bringing things centralized and together, that when one person improves a page, then everyone can benefit from that. And that means that 100% of our activities in order to move forward, every single step forward is a step forward instead of step forward, step back, step forward, step back, which I feel is a problem that we have in the current state, and even the state of OER 15 years ago when we started, 14 years ago to be exact. So what we're trying to do is building a corpus, a repository of OER content that's a bigger bucket of Legos. We bring the content in from a variety of sources, whether they happen to be another platform, they happen to be PDFs, they happen to be LaTeX, they are handwritten. We've done a variety of different types of formats. And we have a harvesting team of about 100 undergraduate students at my campus at UC Davis that are taking OER content, ripping them apart, and essentially bringing them back into our platform. It makes things centralized, it standardizes the content. It makes it interconverted because the content is standardized, interconvertible. That is, you can build collections, aka books, off of there, although you can build other things that are not traditional books, like we have a repository of laboratories for chemistry, which consists of over 200 labs that are not part of a book. It provides extreme flexibility in order to be able to customize, and it provides extreme curatability. I'm going to assume that that's a word, that is able in order to move this thing forward. And this is the guiding principle behind the libraries and why the libraries exist. And this is also the underlying reason why we've been so successful in distributing OER content, and we're the most popular centralized repository of OER content on the internet today. Again, like I mentioned, close to 800 million page views and approximately 800,000 page views viewed daily. Underlying the construction of content, whether it's harvesting existing content or facilitating people in order to build their own content within the library, it is a simple WYSIWYG editing infrastructure. This uses an infrastructure called CK Editor, which is the most popular open source editor on the internet today. It's been augmented a little bit by the company that made the software that we use, in addition to also how we have done it, in order to make this exceedingly powerful, in order to be able to make this standardized approach that I was talking about before, in order to guide these things. So the upshot here is that if you can edit on Google Docs or on your learning management system, you can edit directly on the LibreText platform. I think this slide is slightly out of place. I'm going to skip over this because I'm going to address it at a different point. So again, the aspect or the key point that the harvesting team does is to create and bring content into the libraries typeset it to a standardization, we then introduce cross-referencing and meta tags in order to identify how things can be referenced across morphemes that collected, so that when you do a search on a specific topic, you can see the pages that are connected off of there. It's exceedingly important to do it at the page level, not at the book level, because it's just not good enough off of there. But we have this content of 500,000 pages, and we need to be able to facilitate organizing, parsing through this book in order to be able to build customized books, which is what most people in OER cares about when you're looking at building a book for your class. To do that, we built a tool we call the remixer, or the OER remixer. And the OER remixer is available on any of our libraries. If you go to any of the libraries that we have available and you look on the sidebar under tools, you'll find the OER remixer. You can parse through it at your leisure. You just are unable to save it unless you have an editing account. If you need an editing account, just go to register.libretext.org and you can request an account. It's freely available to anyone that's out there. And I can talk about this after the presentation if we want to do some more hands-on approaches off it. The key aspect of the remixer is a drag and drop approach, where on the left-hand side, you have access to the 500,000 pages of content that you can just drag and bring it over and organize your book such that it automatically numbers the chapters, that automatically numbers the sections. You can then edit content, make new pages, and customize and build it in this way in a very graphical manner, but yet still being able to tap into this massive library of content. And the beauty off of this thing is that as the library gets bigger and more comprehensive, it becomes easier in order to be able to customize the book in order to address exactly what you want. So it's beautiful in order to see this start to come to fruition because the library backing it is getting so big that's out there. So the bot server. So I don't normally discuss the bot server in detail because it's a back-end approach. So we have this repository of content of 500,000 pages. We want to be able to do curation events on there. If you curate these things at the page-by-page level, it's exceedingly inefficient and sometimes an exercise in futility. So we have implemented a back-end curation infrastructure, and it's so powerful that only 3 people have access to this, but it provides us a mechanism in order to do global bots. So we can make a bot that will go through page by page and address specific issues that need to be addressed that's out there. For example, this is the picture of the bot that we have. And if you want to be able to convert images to figures, which is a type of HTML or hypertext markup language, we can go about doing that. We can make tables responsive. We can handle new accessibility requirements that come up. Because we've standardized the HTML code, these bots can go through and start to update the content in order to be able to take advantage of the fact that things are standardized and centralized. When things are fragmented across the infrastructure, you can't do that. And that's a key aspect in order to emphasize how we do what we do. There are a handful of other techniques or tools that we have on the back end, but I don't want to discuss it right now. Learning analytics. So as part of several of our grants right now, we're building a learning analytics dashboard. It's meant in order to be provided to authors in order to be able to identify how their resources are being used in specific classes or an aggregate perspective. It's also being able to be provided to instructors who adopt a book for their class. So it provides a mechanism in order to give them information, give instructors, that is, information on how their students are interacting with the resource. That includes both the textbook and the homework system, which I'll be talking about momentarily, and use that information to guide pedagogy. Evaluate efficacy of what the pedagogy is using, and then being able to identify at-risk students and such. That's going to be freely available to anyone. However, to get access to it, you need to be the instructor of record with appropriate permissions because of FERPA rules and things like that. The last one is it provides a mechanism for evaluating the efficacy of the book. Now, whether we're talking about OER textbook or a traditional commercial textbook, the quality of that book is dictated not by how pretty it is, or how many pictures there are, or how big it is, or how many names that have multiple letters after them that are written in the book. It's dictated ultimately by the learning of the students in that classroom. And unfortunately, 99% of all books, whether they're OER or commercial, have no efficacy evaluation out there. And this infrastructure, this analytics that we're providing, we will be providing this summer, gives us the mechanism in order to do evaluations. So we can actually evaluate the efficacy, evaluate specific learning outcomes, and ask the question, is this section here truly useful in order to convey education, learning in our students? Or does this component need help? And then use that to guide the updating of the content in order to move it forward. So each of those three aspects are key components that we're very excited in order to be able to provide with the new learning analytics infrastructure that we're going to be putting out there. This is an example of how I use this in a class that I taught 8 years ago. It feels like a long time ago, although everything before COVID was a long time ago. This was a part of a study that I did where I taught 2 back-to-back classes of 500 students each. I would never really want to do that ever again. But one class was using the conventional textbook, and the other one was using the ChemWiki, the precursor to the LibreText. And this is just showing the aggregate, although we got information at the student level. This is the aggregate page views per day. And we saw this behavior that's actually characteristic of all books that we put out there, subject to a certain constraint. And the key aspect is that we see cramming right before exams, which is not surprising, but now we had a number off of it. And I could even tell you that it had an impact of about 10% lower performance for the students that crammed versus the students that didn't cram. What I'm interested in is what's the impact on the next class. Longitudinal aspect of that, and that requires having control over multiple classes using the LibreText, which now we're able to do. But we could see here is that if you believe that cramming was bad, I used this as a mechanism in order to guide restructuring the class during the summer, where I made weekly quizzes instead of an exam every 3 weeks in order to try to get that baseline up in order to be able to provide a better educational experience. And this is one of multiple examples of using analytics as a mechanism in order to guide pedagogy and moving forward. And you only get that information when you're able to track it. And that's what we're able to do in the LibreText right now. The Jupyter Notebook system. So the Jupyter Notebook system is a manifestation of this next generation textbook. It's a manifestation of saying, well, here's a textbook. And so far what I've talked about is here's text on a page, here's image on the page, and more. Take a traditional textbook and put it online. However, we can do much better. And that's by introducing more interactivity into the book. And the more interactivity that you have, the greater the learning experience. And there are plenty of studies in order to be able to identify that. In the STEM fields, one of the key aspects of interactivity is being able to interact with code. So in the sciences, we care about being able to teach our students Python or R or Octave, it's MATLAB-like alternative. We can actually run those environments, those codes, in a Jupyter Hub instance, which is a technology that originates in various sources, although Berkeley was quite critical in order to move it forward. And this lets us embed executable code directly into our book. So this is the figure I showed before that I glanced over, where I have the ability in order to take a book, and this is my quantum mechanics book that I'm teaching particle in the box. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. The key point is that it comes up with some examples in order to be able to identify curves, identify energies, and being able to manipulate 5 to 7 different parameters in order to be able to get that out there. This provides a mechanism for students to see Python code, which may or may not be of interest, but they can interact with it. And when they get comfortable with it, then they're able to learn it more actively when they deal with a class that requires learning it. They can interact with it and then start to have these visualizations. The key aspect here is that they can come in and delete different sections here or add different sections and essentially take advantage of the fact that the interactive code is part of their book. So that means that they could be sitting on a bus going home, and they can pull out their phone and they can start interacting with the Python code, which you wouldn't be able to do in this case here, it's server-side technology. It doesn't require technology off of that. It also gives us the ability of capitalizing on what other people have constructed in this category. So this is an example that I particularly was excited about several years ago, where this guy, Free Radical, I feel odd just referring to him as Avatar, but I don't know his real name. And he created this simulation to talk about distillation. It was written in Python. And then we were able to grab it and then within the next day plug it directly into our page. And now my honors general chemistry students can start to interact with this infrastructure that's in place. And then the idea is that we can start to build upon that and then share it in the community, because sharing the community is a key aspect behind open source and OER material off of there. So the Commons and Conductor system. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to show this after my presentation. I'm just going to lay the groundwork right now. We again have over 2,000 pages, 2,000 books of content, collections out there, and we wanted to be able to provide a mechanism in order to tie it together. So we created a technology, and actually Ethan Turner, who's a student who built this technology, is here right now. And on the front end, it is it's a search infrastructure across all the books. That right there is called the Commons. The back end is the Conductor, and this right here we're very excited in order to present, because I'll be talking about this tomorrow afternoon. And it's a OER textbook organization tool. So you can build build textbooks within, let me phrase that, facilitate the organization of building textbooks within teams, involving accessibility, involving reviews, involving tasks, communications, and a handful of other things. Exceedingly powerful tool. It's freely available for everyone if they want, just by going to commons.libretext.org. And if a campus happens to be part of our consortium, they get a branded version of this front end in order to be able to provide their textbooks to their relevant stakeholders that are out there. And I do it injustice in order to keep it static. I need to be able to go to the website in order to do so, and I'd like to do that after my presentation, not in the middle. Not lastly, but now is the forums. So I mentioned communication as a key aspect behind how we operate. So we have two types of communication pathways. One is our forums. So each library has a community forum and a curation forum. The curation forum is meant in order to be able to address issues. For example, here's the curation forum for our math library. Well, people come up and say, well, this is missing a library. This needs to be curated and various things like that, because we're bringing in content from a variety of sources, and many times those sources don't have everything up to speed that we want them to do. This provides an opportunity for the community in order to be able to benefit and contribute to curation, so that we can all move forward off of here in a centralized and organized manner. We also have a Discord channel that's out there, and this provides an opportunity for people who are building books to go into the Discord channel. This is chat.libretext.org, and then find somebody that could be able to help them. We have at any one time 20 to 30 of my team members that are on here, and you can just throw in a question and start having a communication. I'm also on there quite a lot, as this picture is showed here, in order to be able to have this real-time discussion. I will also mention on this theme that's not part of necessarily the LibreVerse, but it's part of how we operate. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 9 to 10 o'clock Pacific time, we have our office hours. It's Zoom office hours, and you can find that in zoom.libretext.org, and you can come in there and ask your questions directly, and I'm typically the one who's there, in addition to several other people, including Josh Halpern, that many of you may have had experience with. Adapt. So Adapt is our homework system, and it's a complicated infrastructure that I'm not going to be able to do it justice right here without going into it. And I will, because we have plenty of time in order to do that. But I will be presenting a presentation this week, and I believe this is Thursday. It's not written down here, and this is our the link that's available for, I think it's Thursday at 4 o'clock. If someone has access to blog.libretext.org, you can certainly confirm that. Sorry, it's not written down here. And that gives me the opportunity in order to go into more detail, because we've been spending the last 20 months building this infrastructure, and then we built and we've been discussing or planning it for several years before that. We're very excited about this, because again, the key aspect is that the textbook of the future needs ancillary materials in order to be able to move it forward, and that's a key component behind how we operate. So the key aspect of here, and I just want to mention that, is that we don't want to recreate the wheel. in the ADAPT homework system. We want to be able to provide the opportunity to capitalize on existing open source content in order to be able to move the homework system forward, so we don't actually have to start from scratch. That being said, we use 3 different technologies that are open source, addressing auto-graded capabilities. One is WebWork, which is about 25 years old, is one of the very first open source homework systems out there. One is iMath AS, which was ported from WebWork. Both of these things are mathematical. Let me rephrase that. They're primarily most successful in the mathematics fields. However, they have great capabilities in order to be used in a variety of other fields because of their algorithmic capabilities. Both of them are server-side evaluation, which means that we can ensure strong security of the submissions in other words, it's difficult in order to hack into it, is what I'm trying to say. H5P is a different story. H5P has gotten a lot of press in the last few years in the OER community. It's a great technology for students that are not visually impaired, but it provides a great opportunity in order to be able to move and interact with material as needed. It's client-side evaluation, which means it's evaluated at your computer, and that also means that you have some security issues because it's relatively easy to hack into. So these are really great summative technologies. This is more for formative, meaning not connected to a grade book, or for very light summative use, because you can hack into it quite easily. And these are some links that you can go into. We also have other technologies that we are implementing into our homework system, this ADAPT system, including organic chemistry, spreadsheets, the Jupyter notebook system I was talking about before. We have a clicker system and a variety of other things that, again, I can't do it justice with the short period of time that I have here, although I'm quite excited in order to be able to showcase that. The key aspect behind these technologies is that each one of these technologies has its own problem builder, its own problem library, its own problem searcher, delivery infrastructure, assessment checker, gradebook, and learning management system. What we are doing is that we're gutting the components that are relatively handling the same issue, and we're using the same technology, this ADAPT technology, in order to be able to commandeer this. So each one of these technologies, while it has all these aspects, we're only using it to deliver a question and evaluate whether the question is correct. And that gives us a lot of power in order to use these things as individual Lego blocks, like how I was talking about with OER, in order to provide a great library for faculty in order to capitalize on. And we have about 120,000 questions of it so far out here. The H5, each one of these things has its own server that we're running. So the ADAPT homework system is actually, I think, about 6 to 7 servers running simultaneously, which is somewhat of a beast in the way it operates, but it's implemented at an open access based approach that anyone can grab in it. Although the code is also found on GitHub, so you can actually grab it and run it yourself, although I'm not entirely sure why anyone would go through that pain. So the H5P instance, so of all the 3 technologies, the only one I want to talk about that you can directly access, not through ADAPT, is our H5P repository. And that is the LibreStudio. And you can go to this, access this URL right here. And LibreStudio is where we host somewhere in the order of 7,000 of these assessment problems. It's freely available for everyone to be able to create, distribute, and apply H5P problems to their respective needs. If you go to this site, you need an access code, and the access code that I'm going to give you is LibreFest 2021 that I just pasted into my chat. Feel free to log in, get the account. You can start making your problems right now, as long as you own the material. Don't put copyright material onto the LibreStudio. And then you can start to use it directly, embedded into your textbooks for interactive, formative use, or you go to ADAPT in order to be used summatively, as I'll mention momentarily. So this right here is a snapshot of the ADAPT homework system. This is actually my classes right now. I'm teaching 2 classes right now, a general and a graduate level class and a first year chemistry class, and you can see other courses that I've created. And if you go to adapt.libretext.org, you can see ADAPT, although you need a free account in order to be able to access that. And you can request an account at the contact information. And as long as you're an instructor of record, then we have no problem sharing an account with you. Lastly is Project Solo. And Project Solo is not named after a Star Wars character. it is our mechanism in order to provide a distribution of the repository that we've created of this 500,000 pages of content, such that individual campuses, whether they're in the United States or abroad, can set these things up and host the content. And the intent of it here is to be able to provide a centralized infrastructure to store content and curate them, because we believe that that's important strongly, but a mechanism in order to distribute it if people want to be able to have an open source alternative to host their content on their respective campus for a variety of reasons. For example, many countries have a requirement that they have to implement OER on open source technology, and our central libraries are open access, freely available for everybody, but they're not technically open source. Everything else that we have is open source that's out there. So in that case here, it provides an opportunity in order to be able to grab it. It becomes and operates like a little mini learning management system. It's not as powerful as a full-blown management system, but it provides a mechanism in order to tie things together into courses better than what the textbook infrastructure that the LibreTexts provides. We're very excited about this because it also will couple into our machine translation effort. So we're able to take our repository of content and shove it through a machine translation in order to spit that 500,000 pages of content into a new language. So you can take it and say, give me a 500,000 pages of OER content in Zulu, or give it to me in Ukrainian in order to handle many displaced students that are having to deal with the issues that are going on right there. Or as we were talking before this presentation started, Swahili. So we have the ability to do this massive seeding of OER content across multiple languages in order to really move things forward. And that is an unbelievable power that I'm very excited in order to be able to do. However, I'm limited by the financial aspects of it, because a translation of that effort is about $30,000 per language for the entire repository that we have. I'm not going to go over all the various aspects that Project Solo has, but if you're interested in Project Solo, again, Friday at 3 o'clock, the very last presentation that I'm going to be doing in Open Ed Week, I and Yassine Dahi, who built Solo, are going to be going through and showcasing its capabilities for people that are out there. Part of that Solo infrastructure is provided mechanisms so that individuals, and this is coupled both in the Soloverse and also the LibreVerse or the LibreNet, which is our individual commons instances, so that campuses can actually communicate with other campuses that are building OER content, so that you don't have to create by yourself. You can learn from what other people are doing. And more importantly, before you create a project, you can see if someone else is currently working on that project somewhere else. Because why replicate the wheel? And it's better to work as a team in order to work forward rather than doing things individually. And again, that's one of the issues that I have with the current OER infrastructure. But I will mention that this is not a decentralized network, or at least not fully decentralized, because we'll also provide a lot of communication through the central hub, which is the existing infrastructure of LibreTexts for curating and distributing content that way, because we feel that's exceedingly important in order to direct these things off here. It's a lot of complexities in order to be able to implement these, and we're not going to have these things going before the summer, but we're very excited about the prospect of really wiring up this infrastructure for people that are out there. Okay, lastly, I will start with what I've started with, which is our mission. So we're implementing a community-built platform for the construction, curation, adoption of OER that's comprehensive and can be curated at multiple levels. We're very excited about the infrastructure we provide. Everyone has access to be able to capitalize on it and move it forward. And we're very interested in order to be able to discuss that with anyone who has a desire in order to discuss it in more detail. So anyways, I have about 10 to 15 minutes left. Let me pull up some websites in order to show these things. If anyone has any questions, feel free to chime in right now. Otherwise, I'll start to parse through some of the aspects of the LibreVerse directly. You can just chime in. You don't need to. And I will also share these slides in addition with the video when it's on there. So let's go to a library. I don't have a library on here. So I'm going to go to the chemistry library. So this is the chemistry library that's viewed anonymously. content in any of the libraries are organized in 3 different ways. We have content stored in our bookshelves. We call these our centralized bookshelves, and those are the ones that we curate or the community curates through those forums in order to be able to move forward. So it's the bedrock of our content. And we either create the content ourselves or we harvest content that comes in order to be able to do it. But the key aspect is whether they're harvested or they're created by ourselves, they're constantly being updated and edited because that's part of the 5 R's of OER in order to be able to move forward with that. And those things for any library is organized on different fields. Different libraries will have different organizations. And again, chemistry, because it was one of the very first fields, actually it was the very first field that we did, is the most mature of the libraries out there, but the other libraries are growing quite rapidly. The content in our campus, let me continue this in order to go through this. So let's say you go to organic chemistry, and then we have these things organized by all the books that are responsible for that organic chemistry resource. And then we can go in and say, here's Tim Soderbergh's book. It's organized by chapters. Each chapter is organized by sections. You can go to the sections and you can actually read through them like that. You can get a PDF of the content. You can get a PDF of the full book. You can import the book into your learning management system, and there are a handful of other export options that are available. Again, these provide the bedrock for people to capitalize on in order to build customized books. And customized books are stored in an individual campus's campus bookshelf. Like, for example, let's say we took Chippewa Valley Technical College, and they've created only one book for their class, and it's their introductory book that's out there. And they have essentially taken the material, or they've built their own material around what they had in order to create this book that they can then distribute. And they can distribute again by giving the URL out to students, embedding into the learning management system, making PDFs, getting physical copies of the book, and such. The key aspect behind that is essentially the remixer. And this is the remixer, which gives us the ability, and this is making a new book, where I can come in and I can say, this is the book I'm creating, and I'm going to grab chapter 1 of How to Be a Successful Organic Chemistry book and just bring it over here, and it comes in. And it comes in, what was chapter 1 is now chapter 6, and all the subsections of chapter 1 are now renumbered. So that automatically renumbers, so people don't need to go through the details of trying to figure out what number is involved in it. More importantly, is that the number on here, the 6.2, 6.3, sorry, 6.1, 2, and 3, will then correspondingly change all the equation numbers, all the table numbers, and all the figure numbers accordingly, because we have a triple number system for all those things. So it provides an easy way in order to be able to quickly build a book, so you don't have to go through the pain in organizing and renumbering things accordingly. We have the ability then to delete content and reorganize it in a variety of ways, where I can delete these things, and you notice that I have it changes the numbering accordingly as I deleted. That's because we have an auto numbering infrastructure out there. This is, and I will admit I am biased, the most powerful infrastructure in order to be able to remix content out there, because the repository is centralized and standardized in order to be able to put that out there. And you can't do that on any other platform. Some platforms can get something close to it, but they invariably have some standardization issues from one platform to another because they're not centralized. Anyways, I will digress on that, and I'll give you the opportunity in order to play around with it. Like I said, you can play around with it right now. It's just that when you try to save it, it's not going to save it if you don't have an authoring account or an editing account. And you can get that by going to register.libretext.org. Which I just pasted it in the chat right there. Okay. I'm not going to go to forums. I'm not going to do the learning tree. I want to just discuss the assessment infrastructure, because that's the more complicated. Actually, there are 2 things I want to discuss. So first one, let me show the Commons and Conductor system. So this is the Commons. This is the technology that Ethan created for us. The front end is the Commons, and this right here is you can either be branded on specific campuses. This is the central one that we run, so we call it the LibreCommons, and it provides a mechanism to do a search. So you can do a search and say, I want to see all calculus books or all things that have the topic calculus out there across all libraries. And it provides a mechanism in order to say, okay, well, here's a book, and here's the here's the table of contents associated with it. And then you can actually get adoption reports, submit a peer review if you want, and provides a mechanism to get the export options on here. There are a handful of other aspects that are really powerful off here, but if you are in a consortium member, for example, Los Rios Community College District, which is a district close by, they then have 65 books that are part of their collection of textbooks that they are using in order to take the place of commercial books. And there was a very unique way in which we built these books that was similar to the remixing infrastructure, but more expanded in order to just basically make faculty write the organization of books, and then my team builds the books for them, which is really effective in order to be able to make lots of these things. But the key aspect here is essentially it provides us a branding infrastructure for their stakeholders. But what I want to talk about is not the front end, which is powerful, it's the back end, which is exceedingly useful. And what we discovered when we scaled up to operating several hundred projects and facilitating several other hundred projects of OER is essentially my inboxes became uncontrollably destroyed. And I wasn't able to facilitate communication. So we wanted to be able to make a mechanism to guide communication and guide the construction of a book. And this is what we have put in place here. So this is a relatively straightforward project. Everyone can get access to this. If you go to commons.libretexts.org and you go to the top, you go right here under login to Conductor, you can request your own account and you can get it for free. This is freely available for everyone in the community in order to tap into it. However, if you build your book on the LibreText, you get other more powerful aspects in order to do this rather than just the organization. So I'm going to go to my projects page, and I just want to look at one project off of here. And this is a project that we're supporting in order to build a healthcare, a Spanish healthcare textbook. And there was a strong niche that needed to be filled by that. And this is an infrastructure that has a team of about 10 different people. They're all part of the team. It provides a mechanism for central communication instead of individual emailing of each other. People put the communication here for the threads, and then we can communicate back and forth, and you can always access what we were discussing at different points, whether they're anatomy sources, progress, project sites. You can then organize your book into a variety of chapters or tasks, either or. You can then assign those tasks to individual people in order to be able to put things on a timeline in order to move it forward. You can then view that timeline in a Gantt plot if you feel like that's the best way in order to reflect it, or view it in a calendar plot in order to be able to see that, in order to identify timelines, deadlines, when you have expectations in order to be able to move it forward. That's very powerful for projects, OER projects, OER programs that are facilitating mini projects out there. We have a roadmap in order to guide people in order to build the books in a variety of different ways. We're working on making this a little bit more flexible, but this is a very good starting point in order to say, you want to build a book, this is how you start, and just basically go through off of there. A few other things. We have a peer review infrastructure. So you can pick up a book that is setting, like for example, the Affordable Learning Georgia evaluation rubric, or the open textbook rubric. And then that provides a mechanism that you can then hand out to peer reviews or peers in order to review the books. It provides a centralized mechanism for people to submit the reviews, curate them, because reviews, when they actually address an issue and the issue gets fixed, they then no longer are valid. Or let me rephrase that, they are not applicable and they need to be curated in order to be able to handle them. This is one of the problems I have with most of the other reviewing infrastructures out there, in that you have a book that is dynamic and constantly updating. Your reviews have to be able to reflect those updations as we actually move forward off of that. I'll mention finances in a moment. Lastly is our accessibility. And this, we have a topic, I think it's Thursday morning, that is actually really beautiful. And it's a mechanism in order to provide an accessibility compliance review. So when we have our accessibility reviewer come in to review a book, each page, he has 81 criteria that he needs to evaluate. Those criteria can be broken into 3 tables. The table of the criteria that addresses the platform, which is, once we've established it, that's across the board. The criteria that can be evaluated by a program, and the criteria that requires a human in order to be able to do that. So what we have constructed this infrastructure in order to be able to make it so it takes all the chapters in the book, all the sections in the book, and you have all 81 criteria, and this is not fully implemented here, this is the proof of principle, and then provide a mechanism in order to make it so that reviewers, accessibility reviewers that is, can come in and say, well, here's a book, and is this criterion good, and click it. Is this criterion good? So you can actually train students in order to handle certain criteria, or it provides a mechanism in order to facilitate this organization. But what this does, it provides the most powerful accessibility compliance review, or like a mini ACR for the book perpetually. So you can always go to the book and say, well, what was the state of affairs for accessibility for this book? And then what do we need to do in order to improve it? Oh, we need to do something like, is all characters under 150 characters? Well, that right there, all text under 150 characters, that is a computer program can go through that. You don't need a human in order to be able to register these things. But this right here is an exceedingly powerful approach in order to be able to facilitate massive and comprehensive accessibility compliance that's done with the protocols by professional consultants out there. And I haven't seen anyone that comes anywhere close to the level of complexity off of here, which also requires an advanced amount of time in order to be able to do. I will leave this topic of common conductor because I'll be discussing it quite extensively tomorrow morning. And I'll just mention something briefly in terms of the ADAPT homework system. So this is the ADAPT homework system. And the ADAPT homework system, hold on a second here. I need to flip a switch in order to turn on a FERPA related button that then makes it so that you don't see the real names. Okay. Okay. Now that we have these on, these are not my students and these are not real accounts that are out there. But the aspect behind here is that you can create create courses. Courses have assignments have assessments, and you can make those assessments either be in auto-graded using those technologies talked about, or be in open-ended. So that you can use this in order to handle advanced classes that there are no auto-graded technologies out there. For example, the quantum mechanics class that's out there. I will mention that we now bring everything together so that you can do a search through all the libraries, irrespective of the technologies that are there. So that provides a mechanism that if you were to do a calculus search, I'm just going to do calc, you'll come up with 5,800 questions. Some of them are web work. If I keep on going through them, other ones will be iMath AS. And I can click this thing and see here's a question that I can then talk about. Well, that's a stupid question. Okay, so I got that correct off of there. But anyways, if I were to switch this thing and look at only the iMath questions that are that have calc in them, we still need to cross-reference the things. I'm sure there are calculus questions in those libraries. We're still augmenting this, but it provides a powerful approach so you don't have as an instructor to care about one technology or another technology. You can use them all as you see fit, whether you're talking about math or you're talking about Spanish that's out there in order to be able to do this. And my Spanish is awful, so I'm pretty sure that I am going to get mostly wrong. So anyways, I digress. We're expanding our libraries extensively, thanks to the community that has an interest in order to be able to run this thing forward. The last thing that I'll mention for this and for the rest of and for this presentation is that ADAPT is called ADAPT because it has an adaptive learning infrastructure. The guiding principle behind that is a learning tree, where instead of delivering a single question, you deliver a learning tree that consists of question and then ancillary nodes that are meant in order to guide the education. So it's a virtual tutor of sorts. It doesn't have an AI behind it right now. It's self-efficacy or metacognition in order to guide the direction of one pathway or the other pathway, but it provides a mechanism, and there's plenty of data in order to argue that this is much better and more superior than individual questions. So when a student fails this question, they can go in and get some training in order to be able to augment that question. It can be scaffold. It can be based off of skills. You can have whatever topology that you actually desire that you want to implement, and then put that out there in order to educate them. And we're working on a way in order to be able to build an AI into this infrastructure to guide this in order to say, based on the student's performance, you can then guide them in one direction or another direction that we feel that that's the case. That's important, but we're not going to have that operational until this summer at the earliest. I will leave it at that. I mentioned that Adapt also has a clicker technology, so you can actually use it in your classroom. And we're working on an app that you can then download from the relevant stores on your phone, or more specifically, students, so they can actually interact with the system without an iClicker-based technology or turning tech or other things like that. It's exceedingly powerful. We're very excited in order to test it out. We've used it for about 3,500 students so far, and it's just growing rapidly. And there's a good chance, if you're in the state of California, that this is freely available for everybody. It's already freely available for now, but we're not entirely sure how there's some issues in terms of the finances in order to be, which is again the question that popped up here. So with that, I will end that discussion, and I will I can address some of these questions that popped up here, and let's see here. I'm going backwards here. Sarah, you asked how to get started for beginners. Info would be the YouTube channel is a good stance in order to be able to do that. There's a construction guide that's available in order to guide people together, and we're going to be building more tutorials that are a little bit clear off here. I'm trying to pull up the construction guide. If you just do a Google search on LibreTexts and construction guide, it will show up, but my computer does not seem to want to bring that up. And like I said, there are office hours in order to be able to jump into in order to get some assistance. It's a little bit of a learning curve, but there's so much power behind it that's expected. But once you get over it, it's relatively straightforward in order to be able to do basic aspects. The bigger issues when you have complex things that you want to be able to do. And because the flexibility is so powerful in our platform, it's not a rigid infrastructure saying you can only do this and only this only. I know I said only 4 times now, but it's a key aspect that that underlies our approach, is flexibility. Okay, Bronwyn asked about finances. So the one thing that the community doesn't fully understand, and I will emphasize this here, is that nothing is free. We like to believe that things are free, but ultimately, when you create OER, that requires people in order to contribute their time. And that right there cost time, and it cost the equivalent of money if they were taking money or taking time away from other resources. Moreover, when you deal with educational technologies like what we have in place, it takes some resources in order to be able to maintain the servers in order to move it forward. So there are the key aspect off of here is that while LibreTexts Inc. is a not-for-profit company, I want to emphasize the not-for-profit. So we're not trying to make profit off of here. So we're trying to operate a sustainable model in order to move forward. To do that, one of our primary mechanisms is our consortium. So we have a consortium that is super cheap. It's about $1,000 a campus in order to engage. And when they do that, they get the branded commons, they get the ability to make an unlimited number of books for their campus, and a handful of other benefits that come with that. And it's from that mechanism that we want to be able to sustain these things. Now, I will mention right now, we have several grants, one from the U.S. Department of Education, one from the California Education and Learning Lab, in order to be able to sustain our project and move it forward. And there is a good chance, knock on wood, that we're going to get another investment in the next few months from the state of California in order to really spread its or distribute the content throughout the state, especially the Adapt homework system, that is. The Adapt homework system right now is freely available. I would like it to be freely available in perpetuity. There may be a chance that if the grants start to wane or we're unable to support it in other ways, that we're then going to have to ask students to pay for it, more specifically ask campuses to pay for it. That would be somewhere on the order of one student paying $1 a month type of thing, which I think is more than enough in order to sustain our project and not make a profit and such. And that right there is, I think, significantly cheaper than any of the alternatives that are out there. But like what was mentioned, it needs to be maintained in some way or another. And that's the reality across all ed tech systems. The nice thing about being in education is that there's a lot of infrastructure in place in order to be able to support these sort of things in education. It's when you're outside of the academia, in order to be able to do that, that you have other factors that play a stronger role in terms of being able to do that. For example, my campus has invested effort in order to sustain this directly, and there are other campuses that are doing so. I'll leave it at that. A full discussion of sustainability, it takes a whole hour in order to go through, in order to process lots of different factors. But the intent is that we have no intention of disappearing anytime in the near future. And we want to make things as free as possible for as many people as possible as we can. So with that, I see a few new messages down here. Are there any time stamping involved? Jawad, are you, when you say time stamping, you mean when you actually save a page or edit a page that it stamps when you actually did it? Or is there something else you're referring to? Because in that case there, I can see every single edit. So every page has every single revision is saved. So you can edit a page at any one time that you want. And this is the page that's the LibreTexts. And you can see everything down since 2019 is saved. And I can go to any version of this page and say, I like this one, and I will revert to it. Although I'm not going to revert to that. And so we have some pages that are over a decade old of hundreds and hundreds of saves that are out there in the database that we can then pull off and use. That provides a mechanism in order to ensure that nothing is ever lost in terms of editing our content, and also provides a mechanism for versioning control and this is not the best example in order to be able to compare two different books, because this is a very simple page that's out there. But there's a lot of power involved in being able to do that. Hopefully that's what you mean. If not, please let me know. This is intimidating for someone that is beginning. However, I'm glad that their office hours. There's plenty of help, Sarah, in order to be able to get you on board. We're having more and more people that are going to the project every day, and we're very excited in order to be able to get more people involved in order to do that. Lots of people are willing to help out for that. Okay, we're good. Two questions. Deadline, how do you? Okay, so internet access is certainly an important issue in many areas. I implemented an infrastructure. So there are several mechanisms that we have in order to be able to distribute or to evaluate this. So mechanism number one is that we have the ability in order to print the books at cost in printers. So if the mechanism or preferred mechanism in order to distribute content to areas that have limited internet access is via physical books, then we can go about doing that. The second one that we implemented is, it's a little hard to see here. This right here is a Raspberry Pi box. Raspberry Pi boxes can act as a hotspot. We can load the entire library onto this thing. It costs about $50, and you can have a power supply in order to run it. If you don't have access to power, there's a solar version of that you can put outside. But you do need a Wi-Fi enabled device, although technically it's a computer and has some export options. So if you monitor, you can be able to use it directly. And this is useful in order to distribute a whole load of the technologies access to areas that have no internet infrastructure in order to be able to pull the content off. And that applies not just to developing countries. There are lots of communities in America that don't have an high-speed internet infrastructure, for example, in reservations in many parts of many rural communities, or even many urban communities that have infrastructure, but they have people who don't have the money in order to be able to capitalize on the infrastructure because it just costs too much for that. And this provides an easy mechanism in order to distribute the content in order to move it forward. I will also comment that we could download our pages, or we will be able to download our books in EPUBs, so you can actually use that as a mechanism for distributing the content. That's there. Second one, can students connect with each other directly across campuses to discuss the content? That's what the community is designed. Community forums are designed in order to be able to do. Some libraries, the community forum is not overly populated. And the conversation is more in the curation forum, but it will slowly get populated. And the chat in chat.libretexts.org, the Discord channel, is designed for for students to get together in order to be able to communicate for that. Do you have any insight on your analyzing whether and how students are using the platform for self-directed learning outside of formal? No. All I can tell is a student accessed this page at this time from this area. Or from the city. I can do more detailed information on taking the IP address and try to recognize that that same student accessed this and accessed that, although that is subject to lots of things, whether it happens to be that individual student and such like that. We can do that's at the aggregate perspective. If we run a book in analytics mode, it essentially takes the book and makes it so students need to log in order to see the pages. And the reason for that is not to hide the content. The reason for that is it forces students to log in. So now we know this person here is using this book and looks at this and looks at this and looks at that. And then from that, you can do analytics across the board. But I'm unable right now in order to identify just at the aggregate who's accessing the pages and why they're accessing the pages off of there. I wouldn't be surprised, given that, in many topics, especially in chemistry, you can't do a Google search and not come up with the LibreText in the top 5, if not the #1 slot. So there are lots of people who are accessing this that are not part of formal education and such. So. Okay, I think I see a bunch of things here. Unless there are any other questions, I think I may have extended my time. Brown asked to ask additional content. What are the counterpoints to the for-profit world? There's like for-profit, and there's sort of for-profit open access. So Pressbooks is actually a for-profit company. They're open source, because they're based off of a WordPress, which is an open source platform and we're based on a more powerful wiki-based infrastructure that we're able to utilize. So that's a for-profit company that they distribute the content that you're able to run your own instances and such if you want to be able to do that. And they have a consortium, a software as a service model. It's not too dissimilar from the way our model is, except they're about 10 times more expensive than how we are. The other ones, also in the nonprofit, that's truly nonprofit, is OER Commons, but their authoring infrastructure is not nearly as developed as Pressbooks and LibreText for doing stuff. Then you have other platforms that are more for-profit, like Top Hat up in Toronto, and they're the type of people that will milk you dry if they can in order to capitalize on money. Lumen for Learning, for example, is a for-profit entity. Pan Open, which is out of New York, is also a for-profit entity. And there are a handful of other communities that are getting involved in OER for profit because the content is freely available as long as they use the attributions properly. So in many cases, they can take it and they can make a profit in the aspect behind it. My hopes is that if we make a system powerful enough, strong enough, big enough, we can essentially make it so that those things can't ever flourish because there's no reason for it. Because I strongly believe that education, public education, should be freely available, publicly available for everyone to tap into. And I don't feel that our students should be a market off of that. Strongly believe they shouldn't be a market. So And I can talk extensively about other platforms and things like the comparison and contrast if you want, but those are the big ones that are out there. So with that, I will close off my final thing. Hold on, Naomi. Let me close this thing off, and I can answer the questions afterwards. I thank you for your attention, and have a good day.